solving quadratic equations. As we discussed, a quadratic equation is an equation whose highest degree is 2. To solve a quadratic equation, we either find the factors of the equation, solve using the square root, solve by completing the square, utilize the quadratic formula, or solve by U substitution. Now, these two approaches here are the two approaches that we will utilize at grade 11 and grade 12. So what I provided you with is a complete list of possibilities that you could use when solving quadratic equations. And solving by U substitution is what we will discuss, and what we've already discussed when we did the exponents video, so I will not even talk in much depth about that idea now. Okay, but once we talk about completing the square and the quadratic formula next year and the following year, then you'll be able to solve any quadratic equation that you're given. For now, all of these ideas will not make sense because I haven't discussed functions. By now, you would understand how important functions are when we work with any topic in maths, right? That's how we work with maths, right? We talk about functions extensively because it lends itself in many other sections. And for us to understand visually what we are trying to say verbally, we will use functions, okay? So what we do is when we're trying to solve quadratic equations, when we're using the first approach, we simply make the right-hand side equal to 0. We make the right-hand side equal to 0. And the question is why? Why do we make the right-hand side equal to 0? Why do we make the right-hand side equal to 0? Because of the zero factor property. This will be used extensively when we are trying to understand quadratic equations. Again, this is just a property that we will use in maths. In order for us to understand this extensively, I have to discuss functions. But for now, just take it as it is. Take it exactly as I'm explaining it. In the next term, I will show you everything that you need to know in maths after I explain functions in the second term. So in the next term, you'll be able to understand all of this. So we will revisit these sections. I'll give you maybe like a 30-minute video explaining exactly how everything should link. Okay, so let's solve a few questions using these 1, 2, 3 techniques. Solving by factorization. To solve by factoring, we make use of the zero factor property, which states that if the product, meaning the answer, of 2 or more terms is 0, then at least one of the terms has to be 0. So basically, if I have to state it here like this, if A times B is equal to 0, then either A is equal to 0 or B is equal to 0. Understood? I've explained that logic before. Since we are dealing with unknowns, therefore we have to find the values that would satisfy this fact. Hence, if we are given a trinomial, we must make sure that one side of the equation, preferably the right-hand side, is equal to 0. This is necessary in order for us to utilize the zero factor property. So this is why, for example, when you're given this question here, they tell you, okay, solve for x squared minus 5x is equal to 6. Your first step is to make sure that the right-hand side is equal to 0 or the left-hand side. But for some rigid rules, let's just say, let's make the right-hand side 0, right? Once you make the right-hand side 0, then you are able to factorize this, right? Because and all you're doing is you're factorizing it. You're just re-expressing this into its factors. But why do we do that? Is so that we can use the zero factor property, right? So that's how everything starts to link. So therefore you'll have x minus 6 and x plus 1. X minus 6 is equal to 0, therefore x is equal to 6. X plus 1 is equal to 0, therefore x is equal to minus 1. This is a fast approach to solve a quadratic equation. However, this approach is only applicable if the quadratic is factorable. Very important word. Sometimes you may be given a quadratic and you are unable to factorize it, right? So how you would know this is you basically wouldn't be able to find two terms that when multiplied together will give you the last term, and also when it's added together will give you the middle term. Or if you put it in the calculator, you get I. Once you get I, means you cannot factorize that quadratic. Hence, as we progress to the course, you will start to employ completing the square, which will enable you to solve any quadratic equation. So that's at a grade 11 and grade 12 level. So for now, what you need to know is that you will always be given a quadratic that will be able to you'll be able to factorize, right? Because we haven't really tapped into other approaches that will enable us to solve any quadratic equation. Okay, very, very simple. So all of your ideas from factorization will apply here, right? So that's the first technique that you must remember. The second technique is solving using the square root. Using the square root is quicker. However, we must consider an important fact. If x squared is equal to y, then x is equal to plus or minus the square root of y. I've talked about this extensively as well. We can look at this in two ways. However, the logical explanation is since x is squared, which is an even power, the base can be positive or negative. You can look at the more in-depth explanation under the section of surds done in grade 11, explaining both reasonings. Alright, I will not talk about that now. Again, as I said, it's a higher grade thinking. But as I've said, you could either have 2 squared is the same as minus 2 squared. So whenever you are using the square root, make sure you include both the possibilities. We've talked about that under the exponents module extensively. But basically what we're saying here is whenever you're using the square root, make sure to include the plus or minus. So if I was given a question like this, x plus 2 squared minus 81 is equal to 0. Now, at this point here, I could have expanded this, right? I could have expanded this and used factorization. But I decided not to do that because I saw that 81 is a perfect square. So therefore, I'll have here x plus 2 is to the power of 2 is equal to 81. And if I square root both sides, I'll have x plus 2 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 81. Therefore, x plus 2 is equal to plus or minus 9. And that's how we get the two possibilities. So x plus 2 is equal to 9. So x is equal to 7 if I subtract by 2 on both sides. Or x plus 2 is equal to minus 9. If I subtract by 2 on both sides, I get x is equal to minus 11. The second approach is if I have x plus 2 all squared minus 81 is equal to 0. If I open out this brackets, I have x squared plus 2 times the first term times the second term, which gives us 4x plus 4 minus 81 is equal to 0. Therefore, x squared plus 4x minus 77 is equal to 0. 1 times 77, 2, 3, 4, no, 5, no, 6, no, 7. 7 times 11, and then 11 times 7. So therefore, that's the list of factors that will make up 77. Then, since the last term is negative, then the terms within the bracket must be 1 plus 1 minus. And since we have a positive middle term, the positive goes to the bigger number. So therefore, x plus 11, x minus 7 will be our factors. And then now we have, since we factorize it, and we have the right hand side equal to 0, we did that intentionally because we need to utilize the zero factor property. So therefore, I'll have two possibilities because I have two brackets. So x plus 11 is equal to 0. Therefore, x is equal to minus 11. Or x minus 7 is equal to 0. Therefore, x is equal to 7. Or what this means is that at x equal to minus 11, it will make this equation or statement true. And at x is equal to 7, it will make this statement true. So we found out the two possibilities that will make this mathematical statement true. This is why it's very important that you follow these steps rigorously. Because, say for example, if you forget to put the plus or minus sign here, you get one of the two possibilities that will make the statement true. This is why you have to be very intentional in maths, because when you haven't worked with functions yet, there's things that you can't see. Purely utilizing algebraic techniques, there's certain things that you can't see. For example, let me emphasize on this point. For example, let's say your teacher didn't emphasize the whole idea of plus or minus. Therefore, you'll have x plus 2 is equal to the square root of 81. So x plus 2 is equal to 9. So therefore, x is equal to 7. So you have one possibility, but using maths correctly, there's supposed to be two possibilities, right? And I even proved it using two different techniques. So that's the reason why if you forget to use a plus or minus sign, you get one of the two possibilities, which is incorrect. You're supposed to have two possibilities when working with this question. And I will explain in detail after we have discussed functions. Right. Lastly, let's look at u substitution.